Hi, my name is Sharanda Butcher, and my case briefing is over Terry versus Ohio. Imagine a busy autumn afternoon in a vibrant urban setting. As you stroll along the avenue, you can enjoy the rich visuals and sound experiences surrounding you. At that moment, you are drawn to two men standing at a street corner, behaving suspiciously as they anxiously look around and exchange a brief conversation with a third individual. This is the setting for a crucial Supreme Court case that was heard in 1968. What initiated this case is that during a routine patrol in Cleveland, police officer McFadden, with 39 years of experience on the force, observed two men, Terry and Richard, lingering in front of a store. The behavior of both men caught Martin's attention. That's the police officer. Their behavior is recognized as typical of potential criminals. They frequently glanced toward a nearby bank and whispered to one another, fueling his suspicion. This seemingly ordinary patrol would lead to a landmark Supreme Court case. When the officer identifies threats or suspicious behavior, the officer may initiate formal procedures for security purposes. This often involves identifying oneself as law enforcement, asking for names or identification, and where there is enough suspicion that the individuals are potentially armed or engaged in criminal activities. Conducting a stop and frisk search for weapons. The officer's performance is designed to assist the situation and assure safety for the public while exercising this right, that balance attention between a person's right of privacy and a duty to impede crime, adhering to local codes and police standards. So with Officer Martin noticing a mixture of what was going on, he decided to move closer towards Terry and Richard. He identified himself as a police officer and asked if they could identify themselves. He checked them for weapons when they appeared unwilling to give direct answers. In the process of conducting a pat-down on Terry's outer clothing, he discovered a revolver hidden in Terry's waistband. The outcome of the search. The police apprehended Terry and Richard. Terry contended that the search went against his Fourth Amendment rights, which were established to protect citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures. The case was the first to raise questions regarding whether the search was lawful and to what degree police were legally allowed to pursue the search without probable cause or a warrant. So some of the questions that came up was the officer's conduct reasonable under the Fourth Amendment. And it says that this was the core issue before the courts, involving a balance of an officer's responsibility to combat crime against a person's right to privacy. The key issue in Terry versus Ohio was whether or not the conduct of the police officer was reasonable under the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The court had to weigh the officer's duty to prevent crime and ensure public safety against the individual's right to privacy. In ruling, the Supreme Court held that the officer's actions were reasonable under the circumstances, since he had particular and articulable acts, which led him to believe that the individuals were likely armed and dangerous. This decision established the standards for stopping and frisk searches in defined situation, balancing police interests and civil liberties. It says, what decisions were made by the lower courts? The trial initially denied the motion to suppress the evidence discovered from the search. The Ohio Supreme Court revised this ruling, leading Terry to argue that his constitutional rights had been violated. In the lower courts, the trial court initially denied Terry's motion to suppress the evidence discovered from the search made by Officer Martin. However, the Ohio Supreme Court revised his decision, indicating that there were issues about whether the search and seizure violated Terry's constitutional rights. This reversal led to further judicial consideration and ultimately brought the case before the United States Supreme Court for final determination. The Supreme Court decision says the case ultimately found its way to the Supreme Court. The judges were left to determine if Officer Martin had the right to do what he did in an 8-1 ruling. The court held the officer's actions. This became what we've termed the stop and frisk rule. The Supreme Court in Terry versus Ohio determined that Officer Martin's actions were reasonable under the Fourth Amendment. The court in an 8-1 decision found that the stop and frisk tactic by the officer was reasonable given the facts. This ruling effectively implemented the stop and frisk policy, allowing police officers to briefly stop people and conduct a minimum search for weapons if they have reasonable grounds to believe the individual may be dangerous and armed. The court balanced public safety concerns against individuals' rights against unreasonable search and seizures. So this makes you wonder, why did the court validate the officer's behavior? And it says that that the officer experienced, then his reason for the suspicion that Terry and Richard might be armed and dangerous. The court distinguished between a full search and a weapon upon pat down. So all in all, with this, my conclusion is that Terry versus Ohio is a significant case that treats the conflict between law enforcers' responsibility to maintain public safety and individuals' right to privacy and protection from unreasonable searches. The Supreme Court case allowed police officers to make a brief pat-down search for weapons, stop and frisk when they had a reasonable suspicion that an individual could be armed and dangerous. This case has affected policing practice and the application of the Fourth Amendment to seizures and searches. With this case, what I've learned is that if you look a certain way or start acting a certain way around an officer, or that will give them enough reason to come and search you for a stop and frisk. All right. Thank you.